Hey, welcome to BenUp, where this Indigenous Catholic tries to stay relevant by using my Indigenous Igorot, American, and Catholic roots to navigate through life's messy waters. Today, I want to do a long overdue book review on Dr. Taylor Marshall's best-selling book, Infiltration. So it's been several months since I bought Dr. Taylor Marshall's book, Infiltration, the plot to destroy the church from within. And when I bought it, I read it completely and really liked what I read. It really made an impact on my Catholic faith. Since then, I've gone back to it several times, reread certain chapters. I've even mentioned it several times in past episodes. So now it's about time to do a book review. Okay. Now, before I get into the book review itself, I want to talk about two things. First of all, I am not approaching this book review on a scholastic level. For those of you just tuning into this channel, I am not a scholar. I've never claimed to be one, don't claim to be one. I rely on scholars, especially when it comes with my Catholic faith. So I am not approaching this on the scholastic level. I am, however, approaching this as a layman, a lay person, somebody who simply had at one time struggled, went in and out with my faith, had struggled with the Catholic faith here and there, and had a conversion period and decided at that time to deepen my faith. All right. So for those of you who are in a similar situation, I think this book review is for you. All right. If you're a scholar or looking for a scholastic perspective on this book review, I think you'll be disappointed, okay? Because that's not me. Now, secondly, before I get into the book itself, I think it's important to give you a perspective of where I'm coming from, where this book review is coming from. And I think it's best to do that by giving you a little bit of a background about me, especially those who are just tuning in on this channel, all right? I am a cradle Catholic. I'm relatively new in the faith. I say that because my parents, Requiescat in pace, may they rest in peace. My parents were very new in the Catholic faith. My father, it was his father that became the first Catholic in their family during World War II. Now my mother, she was the first Catholic in her family. Now what's fascinating to me about her is her father was an Igorot shaman, a pagan Igorot shaman. My grandfather, Requiescat in pace, may he rest in peace, he converted to Catholicism because of my mom. My mom converted him to the Catholic faith before he died. Thank God. Okay. So that was in the Philippines. Now, when we immigrated to America, I was only about 4 years old, but my parents put me through the Catholic school system. I went through a Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, so I went through the Catholic school system. Throughout most of my life, I tried to practice my faith. Thank God it was my parents' example, their devout example as Catholics that kept me into the faith. I certainly could have left it at certain periods in my life because I struggled a little bit about lukewarmness. I even physically and spiritually checked out here and there. Let's fast forward. Okay, I want to fast forward to about 6 years ago. Because 6 years ago, I made a conscious decision to attack certain vices and sins that I struggle with a good part of my life. It is then that I engaged in what is known as spiritual warfare. I engaged in my life spiritual battles. I engaged and fought the demons that led me to those vices and sins. Now, at that time, in doing so, in that spiritual battle, I tried everything I could to deepen my faith with a lot of reading, a lot of listening to Catholic radio, a lot of watching a lot of Catholic things on YouTube. So I tried my best in deepening that. Now, a year later after that period, so that's about 5 years ago, I really connected to my Catholic roots by discovering the traditional Latin Mass, the Mass that I heard my parents grew up with, but never knew anything about, okay? And it was at that time that I really, really started learning more about the Catholic faith as it existed millennia ago and the state it is in today. Now, at that time, I already knew the state of the church was in decline, okay? I didn't have to read things or look at Pew Research or studies and things like that to know that the Catholic Church was in decline. I just had to look at all the empty pews at Mass. And not only that, but those were there, how the majority of them had gray hair, how lack of young people there. You know, I know a lot of families, some close and some not so close, but there's a lot of families that whose parents are Catholic, yet their children have either checked out. They either have left the faith, have gone to Protestantism, have don't even practice any faith at all. They've become agnostic or atheist or even dabble into other religions. There's a lot of that, yet their parents still go to Mass and are still Catholic. It doesn't take a dummy to see the church is in decline. And you hear about all these shortage of priests, all these churches, especially in the Chicagoland area, that are planned to be closed. The church was in decline. I already knew that. But the thing is, as I delved into my Catholic faith, as I delved into the history of a Catholic church, the old rites and everything else, I was starting to really come across a lot of things that saddened me, angered me, and a lot confused me. The first thing that really put up this confusion flag in me was when I first read an article about Pope Francis saying that atheists go to heaven. I left reading that article thinking in my mind that, is that possible? How is that? Because I never knew that. That's not what I was taught. You know, granted, I wasn't the most studious Catholic or scholastic Catholic. I just knew it was common sense. Reason told me that, wait, there's some fishy with that one. And then since then, things just continue to mount and grow and a lot of confusion. I mean, I think those of you who are watching this and are confused, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, you learn about all the tinkering with the liturgy, how the Mass changed and why it changed, about how many priests and prelates these days, they support pro-abortion people and politicians, the promotion of unnatural unions, how people, these priests and prelates, they're promoting the Gulf Alpha Yankee lifestyle, Gulf Alpha Yankee marriages. You get that? For those who don't know the military alphabet, just figure that out. How the tinkering of the catechism is taking place, you know, regarding receiving a communion for the divorced and remarried, for the death penalty, and then this whole big sexual scandal with Carlo McCarrick, or ex-Carlo McCarrick. I mean, this guy was top dog, way up there in the hierarchy in the Catholic Church, and yet he was discovered to be such an evil person. Thank goodness he's no longer a cardinal. That whole thing, and then the Pennsylvania grand jury report that revealed about how many priests and how many clergy are involved in it. I mean, this sexual scandal that just happened is a lot worse than it was when I was growing up in the 90s when that thing was going on. And it's just gonna keep getting worse. Okay, not only that, but I mean, I can go on and on. Okay, financial scandals, all these things. The church she is not in good shape. Let's put it that way. So that's where this book comes in, because I had so many questions in my head. I was so confused. I didn't know what was right, what was wrong. I'm hearing one bishop say something, another bishop say something, one cardinal say something, another, the Pope say something, and then a bunch of cardinals would question the Pope, and it was like, what is going on here? But one thing that really caught my attention in that period was coming across a EWTN documentary. EWTN, this is not a shabby organization, okay? They're a very credible Catholic organization, but they came out with that documentary. In that documentary, something that really jumped out at me and stayed with me for a while. And that is hearing about this lady. Her name is Bella Dodd. Bella Dodd was a leader in the American Communist Party, okay? So she was a communist here in America. And she had testified before Congress. She had testified before Congress about how she personally recruited communists into the priesthood for the purpose of infiltrating the church. So after watching that, I started to realize, okay, so there was some kind of infiltration in the church that has led to all these things that I'm seeing today, that has led to the decline in the church, people leaving the church, bad priests, bad bishops, corruption, sexual scandals, heresy, all these things that you're seeing today. At that time, I started thinking, all right, so there's something going on. But I was wondering to myself, number one is like, okay, where the heck are all these priests that she recruited? Maybe all those people, all those priests, they moved on and they had an influence on other priests, and then they taught them their skewed idealisms that were tainted by communism, and and so forth and so forth, and maybe that's why I was starting to think maybe that's why we got so many problems in the church today. But then I thought, man, how come more people don't know about this? I mean, this is not some secret thing. This was a flat out confession, testimony in front of Congress. It's still out there on YouTube. You can hear the testimony. And I was thinking, how is it that I'm just learning about this? And if I'm just learning about this, why doesn't anybody else know about this? Granted, a lot of people know about it now, but I was thinking, none of the people I know about it. So regarding that, I went to a conference of Father Chad Ripperger. Father Chad Ripperger, I've talked about him in past episode, but he's a very well-renowned theologian and exorcist. But I attended one of his conferences. I drove like 3 hours to attend his conference. And in the question and answers part, I asked him about, how come more people don't know about all those priests, this infiltration that happened? I never knew that, but I do recall you talking about in past conferences about in the church how at one time, what was her name, Bella Dodd?
Bella Dodd, yeah.
How she, head of the Communist Party, infiltrated America, testified before Congress, said she placed 1,000 or something of
seminarians, communist seminarians, yeah.
Seminaries into the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
All right, so you have this indoctrination that's happening on the government secular end, and then you have what seems to be an indoctrination in the church. And
right.
I'm wondering, all these priests, obviously there's an effect of what happened there, and we're seeing it today.
Right.
So if there's an indoctrination, which I think you just agreed with, what are we to do with that? Because the news about learning about the indoctrination about the leftist ideas and whatnot and how prevalent in that society is, I don't know, I'm trying to wrap my head around why more people aren't hearing these things.
Well, there's two reasons. One is because the fox is in charge of the hen house. So the priests and the bishops who are part of this whole problem, or who are the children of the problem, aren't going to do anything to clean it up because they happen to agree with it. But I think the other side of it is the fact that this was all stuff that was done, in secrecy and pulled off. That doesn't even include the literal thousands of Freemasons, too, that infiltrated the church. In fact, the Freemasons said our real hope is that eventually we would end up with a pope who basically agreed with us on everything but wasn't one of us. So the point being is that I don't think a lot of people have sufficient critical skills to stand back and take a look at it and say there's something wrong. The second thing is that it's a grace to see the problem, that there's something wrong, right? Because some people think that the situation in the church is just absolutely hunky-dory. For a while there, I was kind of delighted about that. One of the positive effects of the pedophilia scandal is this whole business is saying that, this is the new springtime and things have never been in the church. That just got murdered through that process. But now, recently, some of them have tried to bring it up again. Of course, everybody doesn't buy it because we all know the church is not in its springtime. So the point being is that I think that a lot of people I just don't think a lot of people have the grace or the intellectual wherewithal to even see the nature of the problem. You see this really a lot among the youth, right? I mean, one of the things that came out during the election is that the youth have been thoroughly indoctrinated in communism/socialism in the schools because they see no problem with it. They just loved Bernie Sanders to death. So I think that's what it is. It's intellectual formation, and as a result of that, they don't have the intellectual wherewithal nor the grace to see it.
So intellect, huh? And not having the grace. So this is where this book comes in, okay? Because when I heard about Dr. Taylor Marshall's book, and I was reflecting on the things I've heard from Father Ripperger and the things I've learned, I go, wow, now that's an interesting book. Maybe this guy can answer all these questions I had about all the confusing things and things I'm learning about. And so I bought the book, okay? Because look at the title, Infiltration, the plot to destroy the church from within. It really rang a bell in me, and I was compelled to buy it. Absolutely, I bought it. So that's what led me to buying the book, okay? So now let's get into the book review itself. So like I said earlier, I'm not going to give a scholastic review on this book, so I'm not going to go chapter by chapter, but I want to share about the things that really stood out and impacted me the most about this book. In its entirety, this book is a great book. Everything in it is great, is something we all need to learn. But the first thing that really jumped out at me is its foreword. It's foreword because it's written by Bishop Athanasius Schneider. It's interesting how his name comes across us because remember in church history there was the Arian heresies, and the one prelate that stood up against that whole heresy was Saint Athanasius. So now we've got so many things happening in the church today. Back then it was just one heresy, the Arian heresy. Now we've got a bunch of heresies happening these days. And there's this one bishop that's standing up that's really speaking out and questioning a lot of things that are going on in it, and that's Bishop Athanasius Schneider. So the fact that when I first saw that he wrote the foreword on it, it's just like, wow, now this must be a good foreword, so I have to read that foreword. See, now the foreword sets the tone in this whole entire book. And after reading this foreword, I knew to myself, I said, wow, this is why I bought this book. So I don't want to do this book review without getting into a lot of important parts about the foreword written by this bishop. In the foreword, he starts out by saying, quote, "An infiltration, the plot to destroy the church from within, Taylor Marshall touches on a topic that is deliberately ignored today." Did you hear that? Deliberately ignored today. And yes, the starting already to answer why I wasn't hearing about these things is because it was being deliberately ignored. The issue of a possible infiltration of the church by forces outside her do not fit into the optimistic picture that Pope John the 23rd, and particularly the Second Vatican Council, unrealistically and uncritically drew of the modern world. In the last 60 years, there has been a continuously growing hostility towards the divine person of Jesus Christ and his claim to be sole redeemer and teacher of mankind. This hostility of the allegedly nice, tolerant, optimistic, modern world expresses itself in slogans such as, "We don't want Christ to reign over us. We want to be free from any demanding doctrinal truth or moral law, and we will never acknowledge a church that will not unconditionally accept the mindset of the modern world." That I totally agree with. This hostility has reached its peak in our day. Not a few high-ranking members of the Catholic Church's hierarchy have not only yielded to the relentless demands of the modern world, they are, with or without conviction, actively collaborating in the implementation of its principles in the daily life of the Church in all areas and on all levels. You hear that? Actively participating. These are priests, these are prelates that he's talking about in the Catholic Church. So you know that question I was thinking is like, were all these priests that Bella Dodd had recruited in there? And by the way, it wasn't just Bella Dodd that brought in a lot of people to infiltrate the church. Freemasons did that too. All right, so I didn't even mention the Freemasons. But so there's a lot of priests that entered to infiltrate the church and tear her down. And now Schneider is telling me that they're still here. Many wonder how it could happen that the church's doctrine, morals, and liturgy have been disfigured to such a large extent. That many would include me. How is it that there remains very little difference between a predominant spirit of the life in the church in our days and the mindset of the modern world? The modern world, after all, is inspired by the principles of the French Revolution, the absolute freedom of man from any divine revelation or commandment, the absolute equality that abolishes not only any social or religious hierarchy, but even differences between the sexes, and a brotherhood of man so uncritical that it even eliminates any distinction on the basis of religion. A little further down, he goes on to say, quote, "Other arguments presented here, however, point to the existence of a kind of ominous red thread which systematically runs through the history of the past century and a half of the church's history. The church of Christ is always and will always be persecuted. She will always be infiltrated by her enemies. The question is always only about the extent of such an infiltration. And this is determined by the degree of vigilance exercised by those in the church who are designated as, quote, watchmen, which is literally meaning of the word episkopos, that is, bishop. The highest watchman of the church is a Roman pontiff, the supreme shepherd both of the bishops and of the faithful. The first infiltration in the church happened with the apostate apostle Judas Iscariot. Since then, there have been in the church intruders, priests, bishops, and even in very rare cases, popes, whom our Lord called wolves in sheep's clothing. Priests, bishops, and even in rare cases, popes are wolves in sheep's clothing. Yeah. That's becoming more and more obvious as the days go by. With devastation and confusion in the church now in full public view, it is time to expose the historical roots and perpetrators of this harm. It may help many in the church to wake up out of their lethargy and to stop acting as if everything is just fine. Taylor Marshall's book is a significant contribution to the work of raising awareness of this situation and taking preventive actions and countermeasures in the future. Stop acting as if everything is fine. And you know, there's a lot of Catholics that are that way today. I mean, you start mentioning things that are questioning things, and they shun you. You know, it's like, no, everything is fine. We have the best Pope in history. Everything is going great in the church. I mean, they've got their heads in a hole, and that's not going to help the church. That's not going to help our children. That's not going to bring back children back to the faith. That's just only going to lead more souls to damnation. That was a powerful foreword. I mean, it set the tone for the rest of the book. The other thing that jumps out at me is early on in the second chapter that he titles Alta Vendita, Satan's Revolution in Tiara and Cope, is that chapter talks about when basically what we see today, the infiltration today, how it goes back beyond the Vatican II Reformation, the changes in Vatican II, because a lot of people think because of Vatican II we're having all these problems today. No, it goes way beyond there, all the way to the mid-1800s. And it started with the secret societies there, and there was a Freemasonic instruction that was written out called the Alta Vendita at that time. Now, I know when I say Freemasonic, a lot of people say, ooh, Freemasonic, oh no, this is one of those conspiracy things. No, it's not a conspiracy. The Masonic Lodge, the Freemasons are a real entity, although they're not secret anymore because they're all over the place today. They first started off being secret because you can get in trouble talking about things that come across as heresy back then in the mid-1800s, okay? You can get in big trouble back then, so they were secret at that time. But they came out with this document, the Alta Vendita, a permanent instruction for their people. This is all well sourced. This is not fake news that is, conjured up from somewhere. These are real things that came out at that time. And here Dr. Taylor Marshall excerpts some of that, and some very important excerpts I want to mention in this review, starting with, the Pope, whoever he may be, will never come to the secret societies. It is for the secret societies to come first to the church with the aim of winning them both. The work which we have undertaken is not the work of a day, nor of a month, nor of a year. It may last many years, a century perhaps, but in our ranks the soldiers die and the fight continues. And later in that document, Taylor Marshall goes on to quote and shows how they had their plans to acquire such a pope to be on their side. Now then, in order to secure to us a pope according to our own heart, it is necessary to fashion for that pope a generation worthy of the kingdom of which we dream. Leave on one side old age and middle life. Go to the youth, and if possible, even to the children. So they attack the youth then through the universities, through books, through poems, and through many things. But they were targeting the youth. And from that youth, they knew they needed to also target the clergy. And in that same document, it talks a little bit about that too. The reputation of a good Catholic and a good patriot will open the way for our doctrines to pass into the hearts of the young clergy and go even to the depths of convents. In a few years, the young clergy will have by the force of events, invaded all offices. They will govern, administer, and judge. They will form the council of the sovereign. They will be called upon to choose a pontiff who will reign. Now, when Pope Gregory the 16th acquired the document, the Alta Vendita, it was sometime between 1831 to 1846. But in that time, after acquiring it, it compelled him to write an encyclical which listed the 7 things that plagued the Catholic Church at that time. Now, get this, these 7 things. Ask yourself, when I read these, ask yourself how many of these 7 things exist today. This is fascinating stuff here. He lists number 1, the abominable conspiracy against clerical celibacy. Check. Number 2, anything contrary to the sanctity and indissolubility of honorable marriage of Christians. Check. Indifferentism. This perverse opinion is spread on all sides by the fraud of the wicked who claim that it is possible to obtain the eternal salvation of the soul by the profession of any kind of religion, as long as morality is maintained. Check, check, check. Number 4, the erroneous propositions which claims that liberty of conscience must be maintained for everybody. Again, check. Number 5, the freedom to publish any writings whatsoever and disseminate them to the people. For we read the apostles themselves burned a large number of books. Number 6, attacks on the trust and submission due to princes. The torches of treason are being lit everywhere. Check. Number 7, the plans of those who desire vehemently to separate the church from the state and to break the mutual concord between temporal authority and the priesthood. Well, we already know that already happened. So we see early on in the 1800s that this infiltration was starting, and we see the fruits of that happening today. And so after this chapter, Dr. Taylor Marshall does a brilliant job in using the preceding chapters to create this timeline of events, key important events that contributed to the infiltration of the church all the way up to today. It's brilliant because he brings clarity to us lay folk so that we can understand what happened since the mid-1800s all the way up to today. Some of the events that he delves into are events like the apparition of Our Lady of La Salette. He also goes into how Pope Leo XIII saw demons gathering on Rome. He moves into the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima. Then he goes into the communist infiltration of the liturgy, Vatican II, which is the modernism on parade, the infiltration of the liturgy, the resistance to the Novus Ordo Missae, the new Mass today, the St. Gallen Mafia. In that chapter, he talks specifically about how the church has been infiltrated by Hotel Oscar Mike Oscar sexuality. Get it? Communism, Freemasonry, and he goes all the way into the infiltration and the election of Pope Francis. So this timeline, like I mentioned earlier, it's brilliant. But there's something that I noticed that I picked up after reading this book that I hope readers will also pick up on, is all these chapters, this timeline, goes all the way back to the mid-1800s to today. This didn't just happen overnight. It goes back to that Alta Vendita, to where they say it can take a long time, or a century or even more. The infiltrators already knew back then that it'll take a while. It's kind of like how you can put frogs in a pot of water, right? And then turn on the fire really slow, and then they won't even know it, but soon enough they're going to get cooked, all right? That's one thing I picked up on is this slow infiltration. if this was how the original infiltrators planned it to be, well, their plan is working very well now, very well. And there's one timeline in this book in the appendices that I really like, because it shows the timeline of liturgical changes, because it shows how the Mass was changed and now what we have now, the Novus Ordo, and now those this. So that really was very informative. But you read all these chapters, and then it ends with something on a positive level, though, because quite frankly, what I just talked about, this is not a book that makes you feel good. As you read through it, it talks about real things, sad things, but important things that we know. But in the end, though, I like how it ends up, because it talks about how do we Catholics respond to all these problems in the church. You know, it lists out the different options that are out there. I mean, it talks about, number one, become a modernist Catholic. Something I don't want to do. It talks about you can become an atheist. It talks about accept the Protestant position. It talks about accept the Eastern Orthodox position. It talks about accepting the sedevacantist position. It talks about accepting the resignationist position, which basically says that Pope Benedict is still the Pope. I mean, these are the things that you hear a lot of Catholics that they're doing. They're leaving the church, or they're accepting these positions. But it offers another position, and the position, he calls this the accept, the recognize, and resist position. What that means is, he goes into, as he explains this, that recognize and resist position comes from when St. Paul, he recognized Peter as being the first valid pope, but he resisted Peter because Peter at one point went against the gospel, went against the truth. It's there in the Bible. And Paul resisted him, but yet he recognized him. That to me is a position of hope. For anything to change, we have to recognize what's going on, but we have to know what to resist. When I hear something about atheists go to heaven, resist. When I see pagans being brought into the Vatican and people and Franciscans prostrating in it, when I see paganism being promoted in the Vatican, resist. There's so many things that are happening today that we need to know what to recognize and to resist. This is the best option, because this is not the time to leave the Catholic Church, okay? This is not the time to leave the Catholic Church. We need to cling on to the teachings, the immutable truth of the Church. We need to support the office of the papacy. And despite what you think of Pope Francis, we need to support his papacy, that the papacy, the office of the Pope. To me, it's like, it's the closest example I can think of. It may not be a very good one, but to me, it's like the United States. We are a democracy, and there are many countries out there who wish they had the democracy we have. There are many countries out there who are still under a communism, who are still under dictatorships, who are very struggling. Many countries out there. Those countries would benefit from the democracy we have. And our democracy has a president, okay? Now, the office of the president of the United States, despite what you think of the guy, all right? I mean, prior to Trump, the last 8 years of that, it was a horrible thing. Obama, okay? Do you think I like the fact that Obama, when he first went into office, the first thing he attacked was innocent lives. His signature, by killing more babies, by promoting the violent deaths of the innocent babies through abortion. But he was still the president. And I acknowledge that, and I recognize that. And I would still defend back then the office of the presidency. So let me go back to something that I mentioned earlier. When I talked about a time when I decided to engage in the spiritual battle of my life and to fight against the demons that led me to particular vices and sins in my life, something happens when people do that. And I've I'm hearing more and more that this occurs with other people. But in my personal life, what happens when you do that is when you connect to your Catholic faith, and when you hold true to the sacraments, and you hold true to the sacramentals and all these things that are involved in spiritual warfare, when you start doing that, a veil is removed from you. Now, I don't know how many people experience that, but I think a lot of people do. All of a sudden, when you're connecting to your faith, when you're getting closer to God, when you're getting closer to Him through the church, through the sacraments, through all of the things that she provides for us, this veil, all of a sudden, you start seeing things. You start seeing things you never saw before. It's like, wow, it all makes sense, and you think dots start being connected. Oh, I can see now how I went down that road and what led me to do this and what led me to do that. And oh yes, there's a thing of clarity happens when that veil is revealed. And this is what this book to me is. It's a removing of the veil, because then all of a sudden, after reading the book, things are a lot more clear. There's a lot more clarity. And you know what Dennis Prager says, clarity is good, right? There's a lot more clarity. And all of a sudden, oh, so I see. This happened. This is why the Mass changed. This is why the Mass is contributing to so many other people leaving the church. This is why these priests are doing these things. This is why so many priests have bad theology, have been gone through the seminaries and whatnot, and these bishops. This is why this corruption is happening. This is why these families, their kids are not practicing again. These are why we're sucked into certain ideologies. These are why people are getting so caught up and attracted to socialism and communism, things like that. Yet they're doing that under so-called their title of being saying, I'm Catholic. So I would recommend this book. That's what this book meant to me. As you can see, it's not a very thick book. It's about under 300 pages. And it's not a lot of big fancy words in this too. So it's like for simple people like me, who get kind of like who struggle with very scholastic books with big words that sometimes I have to even look up in a dictionary. What does that mean? But it's not that kind of book. It's a very easy read book. I read this in just under 2 days. I could have read it in an entire day if I just read it. I had one day stop, but I read it like half day one day and a half day the other day. It's a very easy to read book. More importantly, it is a book that I think all Catholics should read. I would recommend this. Out of a 10, I give this a 10. Okay, so I'll put links below for you to get this book. Dr. Taylor Marshall doesn't pay me. I mean, this is not a paid endorsement. You know, I've never met the man, but I do support this book. So I would really recommend this book. Get out there and get it. Okay. So until next time, like I always say, engage in life's spiritual battles. Make a Catholic difference. Connect to your Catholic roots. Don't just man up. Don't just woman up. Be like St. Benedict and BenUp. Hey, this is Rex. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, hit the like button, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell button too so you get notified on future episodes. So until next time, God bless you.